And attendees are going to come in, and I will just have to admit them all. Or no, they're just going to loop in. Hey, everybody. And just as everybody joins, we are going to be just giving a couple minutes for everybody to get in, and then we will kick this off. Perfect. We're at about 15 attendees right now, so I will just start with the introduction to what this webinar is going to be about. So just for intros on my end, my name is Erica Hartz. I'm the Global Partnership Director with Reesmarks Global. We have put together a really nice webinar that is going to be about expanding into Latin America. The common sort of expansion pitfalls and fixes that the three speakers are going to be going over today. So we have three different speakers: Ian with Reesmarks Global, Lou with Playroll, and then Felix from HSP Group. They will all intro their companies and themselves, but ultimately we have coverage from employer of record to recruitment services and long-term entity setup, payroll, HR services. So we are three different companies that can help you with your total growth plan to any new region. And today we're going to be tackling questions that we hear most common in 4 different regions in Latin America. And those 4 regions are going to be Mexico, Brazil, Colombia, and Costa Rica. Now, naturally, we know there are plenty of other regions across Latin America that there is expansion to, but for time purposes, we chose the 4 that we see the most growth into, at least in 2025. But if you ever want further information, materials, anything about other regions across Latin America or even across the globe, any of the speakers on here today or myself can help you with that content or setting up a call. So without further ado, I'm going to have my teammate, actually, Ian Jackson, jump right into the introductions.
Thanks, Erica. My name is Ian Jackson. I'm one of the account executives here at Reesmarks Global. Reesmarks Global is a global growth and expansion firm, really helping companies with worldwide recruitment. In particular to this particular webinar, LATAM has been a real hotspot over the past couple of years, particularly for helping companies as they navigate first in territory hires in LATAM. So excited to be on this webinar and kind of walk you through what we've seen and how to navigate LATAM hiring.
Thanks, Erica and Ian. I'm Lou Dimitrolakis. I'm the Strategic Alliances Director at Playroll. Playroll is a global HR and workforce management platform specialized in employer of record. We love helping companies to hire talent anywhere in the world compliantly without having to set up a local entity. Under my belt, I've done 107 LATAM-related implementations and projects, so have some experience in helping companies in the US, UK, Europe, all over the world to hire talent compliantly in Latin America. Really excited for the discussion today. Thanks for having us.
Hi, everyone. My name is Felix Folifak. I'm one of the directors within the Global HR Consulting teams at HSP. And at HSP, we help companies expand globally and manage their international operations. Our services are quite comprehensive and diverse, ranging from global payroll, global mobility, technical consulting, HR administration, HR consulting. We also handle accounting services, tax services, and global entity management. A lot of our clients operate within the LATAM area, and I'm very excited to be part of this conversation today, exploring what our clients go through on a day-to-day basis.
Perfect. Thank you all. So we're going to jump into the first country, which is Mexico. I know that these three speakers have gotten a lot of requests, as well as, actual services provided in this region. So what the process is going to be is I'm going to read the first question and we're going to ease each speaker into their question. But naturally, if there's questions that come up from any of the audience, you can throw it into the Q&A box. You can throw it into the chat box. If we can't address it right while they're speaking, just for timing purposes, we'll address it at the end of the Q&A, or we can address it after the webinar directly with you. So please leave your emails or your contact information for any of the individual speakers to reach out directly after. So to jump right into it, and you'll see the color coding. So that will sort of keep the organization behind it, with the Reesmarks red going first. What are the key cultural and legal considerations when recruiting talent in Mexico? And how can companies effectively navigate these to attract top candidates? And Ian, please feel free to answer that question.
Yeah. So with that, I think the biggest thing is when you're recruiting anywhere, to effectively win talent, you have to know the game that you're playing. Once you know what other companies are offering, you can assemble your own offerings. So with that in mind, one of the cultural things in Mexico is they have what's called an aguinaldo. It's a 13th month salary. It's essentially a bonus that gets paid out each year. But when you talk to candidates in Mexico, they will, generally speaking, talk about what they're currently making or what they're looking to make in terms of monthly salary, as opposed to annual salary like we would here in the US. So rather than just multiplying that number times 12 to get what they're looking to make in a year, you need to do it times 13. So just knowing that going in and reconfirming that when speaking with candidates avoids any nasty surprises come offer time. Beyond that, there is a number of benefits that are not legally required, but they are kind of table stakes. They're expected by most employees. And so that's going to be ranging from different transportation benefits, whether it be a gas card, paying for their transportation to get to work, or even in some cases, like having like a company bus that picks people up to take them to work. There are also food subsidies or meal tickets as well that are available, and then private healthcare coverage. So all of these are different levers that companies can pull to make sure that they are resonating with the candidates they're looking for. Beyond that, there's a whole rabbit hole we can go down as far as specific benefits that can be offered to attract top talent in the region. But again, you have to determine what's right to assemble your own offerings to win the talent that you want. But a lot of that will actually lead into Lou and what he does with Playroll as an EOR. So Lou, I'll turn it over to you just with the question, how can companies leverage an EOR to test LATAM markets before committing to a full-scale expansion, particularly in countries like Mexico with its growing tech sector?
Absolutely. Thanks, Ian. And I definitely echo a lot of that sentiment around really making sure benefits in Mexico are spot on in terms of the offering. You'll hear lots of talk about the aguinaldo, and that's very common. In addition to different allowances, we're seeing a lot of remote working allowances coming up in Mexico as well, because a lot of workers now are used to working for companies outside of Mexico and working remotely. And so they'll have that expectation of a remote work allowance or something to get a laptop. Sort of home tech allowance is another one that we see happen quite frequently. Maybe I'll start with a fun fact about Mexico and employment in Mexico. If you're working with an EOR in Mexico, make sure you ask them about VAT and the VAT treatment on EOR related services in Mexico. Because depending on how that EOR is structured and the other services they might be providing in Mexico, they may or may not have a VAT requirement to charge for the services. Another thing that's interesting in Mexico is a lot of people will work Monday through Saturday, and there's a 48-hour working week, which is longer than a lot of other countries, and it will be common to spread those hours out across 6 days, with people taking one full day of rest quite frequently. In terms of using EOR to kind of test the waters in a new market like Mexico before expanding more completely, we typically will see a phased approach where Maybe an initial talent has been identified by a company. That person happens to be located in Mexico. EOR will be a really quick and compliant way to hire that person as a local worker. And we then will see that kind of kick off an experiment. So if a company's looking at a longer term expansion in the country, they might hire 2, 3, 4, 5 people on EOR in the country, sometimes even more. The EOR will be responsible for taking care of the benefits administration, mandatory registrations, compliance safeguards. You see in Mexico changing labor law in 2021, there were labor reforms as an example. And so working with someone who's used to it on the ground in a country like Mexico will be really critical. And then furthermore, we're seeing significant growth in terms of tech talent, both from a strong university ecosystem, but also from a familiarity with working remotely in a workforce that wants to upskill itself to work for companies that are often based outside of Mexico. And so EOR can be a really great way as a regulatory buffer, compliance solution, and way to deploy talent quickly in a place like Mexico. But EOR does maybe have its limitations. And so Felix, maybe a question for you is, what are the limitations specific to Mexico with EOR?
Yeah, thanks, Lee. I think that is very, very vital. And as Louis mentioned, EORs are great to test the market before committing to full entity formation. But while an EOR is an external solution for actually looking to test the market, it's very important to also understand that there are some constraints and limitations if you're considering using EORs. And one of the main ones really is in terms of the control the ultimate employer has over the employees being employed by the EOR. So effectively, the EOR will manage the payroll, they'll do the taxes and compliance, but really, companies are limited by the amount of direct control that can be exerted on the EOR or on their employees who are engaged through the EOR. So this can lead to quite some challenges for companies that have not gone through that model before. And it is also a bit challenging for some companies who may be trying to align their global long-term culture and strategic goals, because that approach that may be used for the EOR, for those engaged with the EOR, will have to be different from those not hired to the EOR. So it's something that should be considered. But there's also a very important concept of permanent establishment. So permanent establishment is a tax concept, and it refers to a fixed place of business through which a company carries out significant activities in a foreign country. Now, it is very relevant because where a company is deemed to have a permanent establishment or a PE, it may be required to pay corporation tax on the income and in that local jurisdiction. So in Mexico, if a company relies on an EOR for an extended period, normally, local tax authorities may actually take a view that the arrangement is creating a permanent establishment and potentially triggering corporate tax obligations. So if a PE is triggered or permanent establishment is triggered, there will be an expectation that the foreign entity should actually have its own presence, which means the EOR will still constitute a risk, and that arrangement will need to be considered. Another point we tend to see a lot is in terms of the objectives of the operation, the long-term objectives of the business. As we mentioned earlier, for small teams, normally EORs will be cost effective because of the headcount. However, as the business grows, the cost of outsourcing HR and compliance can actually exceed the cost of setting up a local entity in Mexico. So it's very important to weigh the size of the operation and the long-term aspirations of the business to determine whether EOR is most appropriate. So I think these are the main items we see for clients in terms of limitations of EOR. There are quite a few, but I think these three are the main ones I tend to see on a day-to-day basis, speaking to our clients doing business there.
Great, thanks, Felix. Thanks, Ian. Maybe just to summarize some points on Mexico. So really important, particularly given the competitive market right now, to get benefits in the initial kind of job offer right. Make sure that you're offering parity or something that will be the local market and talent will be used to. EOR can be a great way to then deploy talent quickly and effectively and compliantly. And then Felix's point around there are some limitations with EOR, and maybe a long-term solution is setting up an entity in Mexico, but lots of nuances to go through with Mexico, whether you're on an EOR or an entity. So best to work with providers who have done it before and have experience in the market. And now I think we're moving on to another exciting country, one with a lot of interesting activity, which is Brazil.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Lou. And just to highlight with Mexico, being part of North America, but in that Latin America sort of bubble, it's funny the amount of times we have clients that are, either from Asia or Europe or the other North American countries that, assume that expansion to Mexico would be similar to, Canada or the United States of America. But just everything that all three of you brought up, it looks very different. And so for people to go into those conversations expecting that it is going to be a little bit of a shock to your process, it's going to be different, and you really need to be aligned with the right people is absolutely essential. But as you said, Brazil absolutely is next. So to keep the same structure, Ian, I have your question, which is, how does the competitive landscape for skilled professionals in Brazil impact recruitment strategies? And what innovative approaches can recruiters use to stand out in this market?
Yeah, so with that, I would say, as for the competitive landscape in Brazil, this is a country that has a few different things going on at once. So number one, they've seen a major uptick in recruitment over the past few years internationally. This is because Brazil offers a skilled labor force. Many of them are multilingual. Portuguese, English, and Spanish are the three most common languages. So from Brazil, that can really be a sort of launch point for the rest of LATAM. They can work with employees in the US, as well as sell into or work with other parts of Latin America. Additionally, Brazil is a very fast-moving, competitive market. They had record low unemployment in 2024. So with that in mind, if a company comes into Brazil thinking they're just going to post a job on job boards or whatever, and receive qualified applicants, they're likely going to be disappointed. If you want to be competitive, it's really going to take an active recruitment approach to win top talent in Brazil. So you'll need to identify competitors or other companies with the skill sets that you need. And then you're going to really get to that next level and attract that talent to leave their current employer. What that means, you're going to need to understand, what the going price is for this talent, as well as what their benefits are, what it's going to take to lure them away from their current employer. Additionally, the other thing to be aware of as a recruitment firm is just knowing, at least to some degree, legally, that Brazil is very strict on international companies coming into the country and choosing to operate there. And so, again, that kind of leads into the EOR part of it. It's an invaluable tool to help you as you navigate remaining compliant in those countries, being competitive on benefits, and avoiding any additional fines for operating in Brazil. So I know that's something that Lou can speak to as well. And that kind of leads into the question for him. Lou, how can businesses optimize their tax strategies when expanding into LATAM countries, especially given the complex tax systems in places like Brazil?
Absolutely. It's a great question. Maybe just to start with a fun fact or more of a challenge about Brazil and employment in Brazil, but you really have this dual challenge of, on the one hand, you have at-will employment in Brazil, but on the other hand, you often have very strict collective bargaining agreements, which I know Felix will talk about, and sometimes very high severance accruals. So on the one hand, while it's relatively easy to terminate someone, it can be very expensive. And also there may be other terms of a CBA that you need to pay attention to. So from stepping back from a tax perspective, Another reason to utilize an EOR would be to be able to hire talent without having a permanent establishment in the country and the associated tax risks or tax obligations that come with that. Obviously, on an EOR model, you still need to account for employer taxes, and the burden in Brazil isn't that significant, between 20 and 40%. But if you're for example, a Spanish company and you want to hire someone in Brazil, or a couple of people on EOR, then presents an effective solution from a tax perspective to avoid kind of having a corporate tax setup and having to pay corporate tax in Brazil in the short term before establishing an entity or another solution for the longer term. In terms of the actual tax system in Brazil, most of the challenge comes on ensuring obligations are met in accordance with a relevant CBA. And that will be things like benefits and taxable treatment of different benefits. It will have a relation to other sort of employment rights. And you'll want to get an EOR or employment solution that is familiar with the market, has the right sort of registrations and tax contacts to be able to deliver services effectively and compliantly, and will give the employee or candidate the peace of mind knowing that their taxes are going to be effectively taken care of and structured. And that's, again, something to Ian's point of we do see that the candidates in Brazil on a whole are fairly demanding in terms of either wanting parity with a previous solution, maybe CBA or setup that they've had in the past, or just wanting, if they're working for an international company, asking for a lot of different benefits. And so understanding the tax implications of that and working with a company that has experience is going to be really important to make sure you get that combination right. I mentioned one of the challenges in Brazil is this kind of dual, relatively loose employment law, at the same time strict in terms of potential contractual considerations, and most of that revolves around collective bargaining agreements. So I'll hand it over to Felix to help us answer how common collective bargaining agreements are in Brazil, and what challenges do they pose for different employers.
Yeah, thanks, Lou. I think that's a very critical question. In fact, he did mention, I think Ian also mentioned that as well, that Brazil has a very complex tax system. In fact, there's also a very demanding legal system, in the sense that there's a lot of so many unions, so many trade unions, both on the side of the employer and on the side of the employee. And unions have binding collective bargaining agreements. In fact, a collective bargaining agreement, just to expatiate on that, is a legally binding contract negotiated between groups of employers and a labor union representing employees. And it typically really outlines the terms and conditions of employment, including things like the wages, working hours, benefits, security, and all of that. So in Brazil in particular, in fact, all companies that I've come across in Brazil are subject to unions. It's one of the very few countries in the world where all employees are covered by unions. So understanding the impact a union will have on your operations in country is very fundamental. And that's actually one of the first things we do when we have a client come to us looking to expand into Brazil. We tend to understand their industry, their sector, and then understand what collective bargaining agreement will apply, just so that we understand the specifics that should be accounted for. So in terms of, again, what we see on a day-to-day basis, in terms of the challenges that the CBA poses on companies in Brazil, one of the things that also is very peculiar to Brazil is the fact that there are various collective bargaining agreements, often varying by the industry and by the region. So it depends on where the company is located. It also depends on the industry. So this makes compliance quite challenging for foreign companies that may be unfamiliar with local labor laws. Another thing or challenge we face, or we find our clients facing, is that the CBA often dictates very strict working hours, minimum wage levels, benefits, and termination policies. So, so this leaves many employers with very, very little room to maneuver in case they wanted to customize their operations or they align their local policies to their global policies. So it's vital that what is permissible from the CBA is considered. As a result of the CBA with so many restrictions, naturally, it can actually increase the employer level cost in Brazil. Again, because in addition to statutory minimum benefits provided under the law, the CBAs will also tend to impose additional perks, mandatory benefits, something like meal vouchers are something we find very common. And some of them actually have specific levels of private medical cover that will actually, in some cases, need to be secured with specific insurers. So it can be very specific depending on the industry and the sector. So in addition to these 3 points, what we find as well is that changes in employment conditions, even if beneficial to employees, may not just be implemented. They have to be unions have to be consulted, and union approval has to be obtained before those changes can really go ahead. So I think what we tell our clients on a day-to-day basis is that they should always, at the beginning, try to engage with local union, local consultants, the likes of ourselves or employment lawyers, and really ensure that they understand the specifics of the CB and how that is going to impact their operations and their cost of employment.
Ian, was there anything you wanted to add?
No, I think that pretty well summarizes everything. I like that, we're all three sort of echoing one another and kind of where the overlap between our respective areas were.
Perfect. Yeah. And what's cool about Brazil is the sort of high growth push. I mean, Brazil in Latin America has been always sort of and correct me if I'm wrong, Ian, Felix, or Lou, but it's always been sought out. I would say over the past 10 years, we've sort of seen that consistent growth. But in the past 3 years, the heavy weight to that amount of growth to Brazil. I mean, Reesmarks, we've made 4 hires in Brazil just this year, and they were kicked off in this year. So, and us being a global recruitment firm, I mean, it's rare we get the same country in the same month with the same style roles or anything like that, right? So to have the same country, 4 different hires in just a couple of months, that's not super common in the global expansion industry. So we're seeing a huge push to Brazil. Felix and Lou, do you guys see that the same on the employer of record and the entity setup?
Definitely. And actually, there's been a significant increase over the last 2-3 years in companies based in Spain and Portugal in particular, hiring and leveraging the Portuguese and Spanish speaking talent in Brazil. And so that's an interesting trend that we've seen, and a lot of those companies then using employer of record as their solution to access talent in the market. Definitely increasing activities there. But lots of challenges in terms of the CBAs and different severance rules, benefits, packages, as Felix and Ian spoke to as well.
Perfect. And go ahead, Felix. Sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to say, but by far from the clients we have in the LATAM, Brazil tends to be sort of the favorable location. I think mostly educated by the size of the population and the skill level Ian mentioned. They are very talented, they're very competitive, but I think the opportunity is there. But obviously there's the compliance element in terms of how difficult it is to navigate the system, which is becoming, I guess, more and more business friendly these days, but it still remains a challenge.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
It is
We
funny.
have,
Oh, go ahead.
sorry, Ian, I don't mean to cut you off, but we have an extra minute for this, and we had somebody raise their hand, Sandy. So I'm gonna have Sandy, we'll let you talk. I see there was another hand raised, but we'll probably just have time for Sandy before we go to the next location. So Sandy, I'm gonna allow you to talk if you would like to.
Yes, thank you for letting me talk. And I wanted to ask about Brazil and Germany. So Brazil, in terms of EOR record, are you guys from HSP? Like, what company am I doing this webinar with? I just want to know. Or is it an independent company?
So I'll let Lou answer that. So, but Lou covers the employer of record through Payroll, and Felix is talking more on the side of the entity setup and all of that. So I think that answered your question, but Lou, would there be anything that you wanted to add for that?
Yeah, so again, there's different ways of there's different employer of record solutions. I'm representing Payroll, which is a full service employer of record who can support Brazil and all the countries that we're discussing today.
Wonderful, perfect. And Sandy,
Um,
if there was any other sort of follow-up questions, feel free to just throw it in the chat, and we can connect you and Lou after this webinar as well to answer any questions that you might have. I think I just cut off one of the speakers. Did somebody want to say something before we went to the next?
for completeness, I'm just going to say that Payroll is HSP's strategic partner for EOR services. So if you're talking to Payroll and HSP, I think it's the same partners, and we are very aligned in terms of our strategic moves and the quality of service we provide to our clients.
All right, now going on to Colombia. This is another region that has been sought out, at least from the recruitment side and the Reesmark side. We see a lot of Colombia expansion in the most recent years. So I'll jump right into it with Ian's question on this region was, how do regional differences within Colombia influence recruitment practices? And what strategies can recruiters employ to ensure that they are reaching the diverse talent pools across the country?
Yeah, so with Colombia in particular, it's a very interesting place to be recruiting in that there are multiple sort of reasons for differing prices within different skill sets. And so, for example, when you're recruiting for let's say a Java developer, just to throw out an easy example, you will see a wide variety of pay points. And so one person may be, $25,000 different from somebody that on paper has the same sort of resume. And there are a couple of different factors that come into play there. One, someone's socioeconomic background absolutely plays a part in what they demand in the marketplace in Colombia. So that is a major difference. And so we sort of advise candidate or clients going into Colombia that they will see a pretty wide variety of pay ranges, even across candidates that on paper look very similar. Additionally, there are substantially different regional differences across Colombia. And so the largest of that is, hiring in big metropolitan areas like Bogota, Medellin. Those sort of areas are substantially different than hiring in these smaller and mid-sized cities. Since cost of living is going to be substantially higher in the big cities, and you are likely going to have talent that's worked with a global company before, both of those factors drive up the cost of hiring there. There is some opportunity when you are looking to do cost savings in Colombia. You can look at some smaller cities. Obviously, there is a balance to strike. You need to get an area that has the proper infrastructure to ensure that you've got, high-speed internet access and things like that. But there is a lot of opportunity for areas that have the proper infrastructure where you can get candidates that will have the ability to work from home and will have a lower price attached to them than folks in the larger cities. As far as trying to ensure that you're reaching diverse talent pools across the country, there are a couple of things you can do. Number one, having access to multiple websites, not if you're entirely reliant upon a single tool. I think this is true most places, but particularly so in Colombia. If you're completely relying on a single tool, you're setting yourself up to fail. And so not being overly reliant on a single job board like LinkedIn or something like that is a absolute must. You've got to be present on local job boards, on local websites, And ideally, if you've got a strong network on the ground that you can tap into, that's really the best way to make sure that you are reaching all possible people that would be a fit for your role. Lou, I will pass it over to you. What strategies can businesses employ to mitigate risks associated with political instability and corruption in Colombia and other LATAM countries?
Thanks, Ian. It's actually a quite challenging question because it will depend on the nature of business activity that a company's engaged with, the industries that they're used to working with, and the suppliers in particular when entering a new country that they might be engaging with. The reason to utilize an employer of record as an example for risk mitigation in a place like Colombia might be that if you were to go set up an entity yourself, which will require involvement from various government, tax, commercial authorities, and various different suppliers, the number of different parties that you might have to engage obviously increases the risk that one or multiple of them maybe doesn't do things properly or creates unnecessary risk in relation to the question here. And so if you're using an EOR, it doesn't just stop there. You'll want to do due diligence on that employer of record and ensure that they're actually the ones providing the employment in the country. They're actually the locally registered employer, and they're not just using another supply chain of local in-country partners. And so I think to answer the question, number one is use a partner provider that's already established and has a track record of successful operation, and an auditable track record in the country. And the second one being just in terms of the general business strategy, asking those kind of challenging questions to any supplier that you're working with, making sure that you get sort of documentary or certifications, evidence that you need to try and avoid challenging situations in these kinds of countries is a best practice. And a lot of companies will have kind of a internal compliance and anti-corruption team, and that also should definitely be involved in your kind of vetting of employer of record or other global solutions providers in terms of their actual in-country operations, who they're using as their suppliers, and ensuring a really clean and well-organized supply chain for service delivery. Great. And on the back of that, I think part of some of the challenges that we see, and the reason why a lot of people do use EOR in Colombia, is because it can be quite challenging to actually incorporate in the country, lots of different parties and government organizations to go through. And so I'm handing it over to Felix. What do you see as kind of the biggest challenges businesses face in Colombia when incorporating, and when do you think that using an EOR actually does make more sense?
Thanks, Lou. Again, I think that's a very important question because when we speak to clients looking to get into Colombia and looking at their options in the country, we'll explain what an EOR will do and also when it makes sense to incorporate. And one of the challenges that we tend to really address when talking about incorporating in the country is to do with the length, the amount of time it takes for them to actually get the process completed. The process to register a company, a limited company in particular, a local subsidiary, for example, is quite time consuming. And this is mainly because of the bureaucratic process that includes obtaining a tax identification number and also the social security registrations, which is very vital for local reporting. Timescales can be also very varied, but averagely it takes between 2 to 4 months to actually get a company set up. And I'm comparing that to the UK, for example, where you can set up a company within a day or two, right? So for Colombia, the systems are still very bureaucratic and very slow. So that can be a source of frustration for many companies setting up in the country. Another issue we tend to speak to clients about the country that for some of them is quite frustrating is the tax system. Now, the tax system in Colombia is relatively high. It's one of the highest tax countries in the LATAM, given that their corporation tax rate is close to 35%. On top of that, there's also mandatory VAT registration subject to thresholds. And then there's also withholding tax and many, many local municipal taxes. So this has to be considered when setting up a local entity. In addition to the tax system, the local labor rules as well can be very, very rigid, especially when it comes to hiring and firing, mainly in terms of dismissing and having to let go of employees, especially for unjustified reasons. It can be very expensive. Severance payments are very high, and there's always a lot of strong employee protections. So again, it's always very important to make a considered decisions if considering letting an employee go. Then there's also factors that you, Ian, and we alluded to in terms of the political instability that can represent a very significant risk, in the sense that frequent policy changes can really impact business operations, requiring constant legal monitoring. So it's very vital to take that into consideration. Now, to the second point, in terms of when does using an EOR make more sense? I think, as again, you alluded to earlier, Lou, in the sense that EORs are very good to test the market. So if a company is unsure about their long-term operations in Colombia, the EOR provides a very flexible option where they can actually see how things are going and plan about their commitment for the future. So the EOR can actually also be very helpful just to avoid the numerous compliance burdens we just alluded to, in the sense that the EOR will manage a payroll, they will take care of the taxes, HR compliance, thereby reducing the administrative complexity for the ultimate employer. Obviously, EORs, one of their big thing is really ensuring faster hiring. So companies can actually just start operations immediately if using an EOR, obviously subject to identifying the candidate, as opposed to having to set up an entity within a couple of months and then having to employ people. So that gives a unique advantage for EORs. But on the point of political and economic risks, EORs also can really shield the business from some local risks by keeping local legal employment responsibilities at arm's length, and the fact that the EOR is the legal employer for the candidate. So the long-term business looking to scale in Colombia can really transition to a local entity once they have stable operations and they are very sure that the project is going to be sustainable. So again, the EOR is fundamentally good to test the market, but the long-term strategy, if there's really genuine interest to scale and expand into the market, is through the entity. Obviously, there's going to be challenges setting up an entity, but I think it helps to look at the long term and absorb the local short-term challenges of the bureaucracy that may be involved with having a local entity set up. So yeah, I think these are pretty much issues that we find on a day-to-day basis.
Perfect. And just to sort of wrap it together with maybe my own little experience, the talent in Colombia is quite strong, where we're seeing a lot of tech growth into Colombia, which traditionally we have seen in Asia within India, with Eastern and Central Europe, a lot of sort of affordable tech talent for the Western companies, or USA, Canada, and Western Europe. But so quick question, and I don't know if it would be Lou or Felix to ask, but when it comes to the taxes being higher in Colombia, but the salaries being quite affordable in Colombia for something like a tech talent role, like a quality assurance project manager, whatever you want to name, is it still one of the most affordable regions in Latin America?
Yeah, so Erika, let me clarify that my reference to the taxes being very high was mainly in terms of corporation tax. corporate income tax. I believe their income taxes, employee income taxes are still relatively competitive. Obviously, it is in trenches depending on how we earn, but I think income tax thresholds are still reasonable. The main focus there was in regards to corporate income tax. But as you said, it's still a very attractive economy.
Gotcha. Okay, perfect. That's nice to know. All right. Now going right into Costa Rica, and this is our final location we'll be covering today. So you know, like I said, there's plenty of other regions in Latin America that have high growth and are wonderful regions to expand to. And if you want more information about those, we're going to be sending out materials from Playroll, Reesmarks, and HSP to share just to learn about these other regions, but also feel free to message, contact, call, whatever you need. So now kicking off yet again, and finally with Ian, what are the main challenges and opportunities in recruiting for tech roles in Costa Rica, and how can companies leverage the country's growing tech ecosystem to attract top talent?
Yeah, it's funny. So the main challenge and the main opportunity are essentially the same thing. So as Costa Rica has risen up as a real hotspot where people want to go for hiring tech talent in LATAM, the challenge of Costa Rica is it's not the cost-saving offshore destination that it was 5 or 10 years ago. It used to represent a pretty substantial savings versus hiring for somebody in the US. That has changed since a number of large tech firms, Amazon, Microsoft, IBM, some other massive players with a lot of money to throw around. They've substantially driven up the cost of hiring in Costa Rica. If you're looking for more basic technical roles, you know, QA people, for example, this is likely a more cost prohibitive place with limited cost savings to go. And there are going to be some better options. However, the opportunity that's emerged here is due to them now having this thriving tech ecosystem, they have an experienced tech workforce. It's not an entire workforce just of QA testers and, you know, lower level developers. They've really built out these teams for these multinational companies. They've worked closely with their counterparts in the US, in Europe, and other locations. And so there's a great opportunity that's arisen there for as workers move up through the ranks in Costa Rica, there are higher level employees available who've already worked with large multinational tech firms. So that combined with the high English literacy rate in Costa Rica really makes this a compelling place to look if you're trying to win candidates who've been developed by top companies and are looking to make their next move professionally. So there's definitely some substantial opportunity if you're looking to hire some, you know, higher level managers or full stack developers or something like that. And it represents a cost savings to hiring them in the US or some other comparable locations. Lou, you know, in your opinion, what are kind of the key considerations for, you know, attracting those candidates with competitive comp packages that are legally compliant and, you know, will draw in that top talent across Costa Rica and other LATAM countries?
Thanks, Ian. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I totally echo that. I actually was just researching ahead of time. There's something like 400 major US corporates that now have a presence in Costa Rica. What I see on a day-to-day basis is actually Costa Rica, I think, is the 5th most popular hiring country for us all around the world. In terms of companies using EOR to hire talent in Costa Rica. So it's just become incredibly significant over the last 2 years, I'd say. And part of that is driven by a lot of big US listed companies setting up there or using EOR actually for hiring talent locally. And what's the biggest challenge has been this to this exact question, creating compensation packages that not only work locally and are competitive locally, but are now kind of increasingly competitive in terms of, here's an international company that's hiring me. I'm locally based in Costa Rica. That package needs to be really considerate, thoughtful, competitive locally, include everything, and kind of give me the allowances, benefits, and compensation levels that I'd expect. So I think a lot of people on this call and in the audience would probably be very surprised at how high some of the salaries and compensation packages are in Costa Rica now. And I think, again, that's due to a lot of market trends and dynamics, but also an experienced workforce. Like Ian said, a lot of the workers that we see in Costa Rica have actually been working for another US company, big US company, usually before their current one, and they kind of job hop a lot. So base salaries are kind of table stakes, competitive base salaries. Having a kind of good leveling framework within the country in terms of different role types and levels for compensation, ensuring that there's actually a kind of a work-life balance, things like remote work allowances. Again, we see fairly frequently transport allowances if there is transportation required, and increasingly a focus, particularly from the larger tech companies, of focus on kind of career development and professional growth opportunities. And so we'll see learning and development budgets come up a lot and be frequently added, or stipends for learning or advanced education. I think there's a natural, a significant push to kind of continue to upskill that workforce because of the success of the last couple of years. And so there's definitely been an investment in increasing these types of allowances or compensation aspects, focus on education, upskilling. And then, yeah, so I think key considerations are just do your research or work with someone who can do a proper benchmarking study for you, so you understand. I know Reesmarks and HSP both can support on that, and really understand what's on offer in the market. Because if you just go in and offer someone a salary you might think is decent or is just significantly lower than the US, it might not actually be competitive locally. And furthermore, I mean, we'll frequently see really high pay packages actually, and increasingly a lot of expats, even US executives, going to work in Costa Rica remotely. So it's not just local talent, it's also expats moving into the country, which has wonderful natural beauty and is a great place to good infrastructure to work remotely. And then I think leveraging total rewards communication and ensuring that people are really aware of the total package of what you're offering them is a best practice, regardless of the country, but something, again, we're seeing people scrutinize, talent scrutinize in Costa Rica. Felix, I think there are, beyond the obvious costs, there are also potentially some hidden costs of employment in Costa Rica. It'd be great to hear your perspective on some of those.
Yeah, surely you're right. And as we've all alluded to, Costa Rica has a very well-developed labor system with significant employer obligations, even more and more so because it's becoming more and more popular, especially for the tech sector, as Ian mentioned. So some of the hidden costs, I would say, that we tend to see working with many of our clients at HSP include the likes of the 13-month salary. Again, the 13-month pay is literally like a mandatory bonus equivalent to 1 month's salary that is typically payable in December, that all employees will expect to get. There's also very high Social Security contributions, and these are employer contribution. It is currently approximately 26.5% of the employee's gross pay, which is really significant. So that will obviously significantly increase payroll cost. So something worth considering when budgeting for the budget for expansion in the country. Then there's also relatively heavy severance and termination cost for employees. If an employer terminates an employee without cause in particular, severance payments can be very substantial. So it is also normally included a proportion equivalent to vacation pay or accrued vacation and any legal compensation. So it's always very important to make sure that due consultation is made with experts, the likes of HSP, when deciding to lay off an employee in Costa Rica in particular. Then employees, again, as Ian and Lee mentioned, employees expect a lot of perks because it's a very competitive market and they are also comparing. They will also have moved from other competitor organizations. So the extent of perks and benefits that they will expect is relatively high. A lot of them will expect to have meal allowances, transport allowances or transportation stipends. Private health insurance is almost a norm these days, although it's obviously not mandatory. So all of these benefits can add to the total cost of employment. Beyond employee expectations, there's also regulations around health and safety. So compliance with strict labor laws on the working conditions and health and safety of employees can also be very costly. Most often, employers will really hire like a third-party specialist firm to come in, do an assessment, and then help monitor that process. Again, that is an extra layer of cost that can really add up. In terms of really managing this, I think as Lou said, it's very important that the business looks at total compensation. It's not just the basic salary. It's important to review total compensation budget in terms of the pay, whatever perks we provided, and then social security contributions as well. If there are bonuses, that should also be taken account of when analyzing your budgets. Most employers also offer flexible compensation packages, offering performance-related payments like bonuses, in addition to fixed salaries, just to ensure that performance is actually promotions or compensation is actually tied to performance. And yeah, so again, EORs are ideal for initial hiring. It's a very common tool used in Costa Rica, more so than other markets where the appetite for EORs may not be the case. And I see that continuing to be the case, especially with regards to the increased appetite for many companies to hire tech talent in the market.
Wonderful. Thank you. And we only have a few minutes left, and we'll get into sort of the Q&A, but I think a really nice synopsis of Costa Rica is it's a very appealing region to grow to. There is high growth that has been growing into this region, so make sure you do your research before the formal expansion begins. We provide many times salary benchmarking on what the talent looks like, the best cities to look at, where maybe there is not the most amount of growth and you might be able to still find that affordable talent. But then also understanding the things that, Lou and Felix brought up. I mean, Felix mentioning the 13-month salaries, the pension requirements, the paid time off, the requirements of how you're supposed to take that time off, and, the employer of record liability that needs to be held in that region and what it's looked like and how it's evolved over the past few years. So, Costa Rica is not only a wonderful place to expand to, but do your due diligence. Talk to, Reesmarks, HSP, and Playroll to really understand what you're getting into, because there are in some instances where you're looking for a specific role style, and if you're maybe a North American company, you might only be saving 5% end of day. So what should we do? How should we adapt that prepping and that planning and that location to really make sure it's to the best of your growth, especially if you're cost conscious in any way.
Thanks. Sorry, Erica, just to jump in, another interesting point on Costa Rica is as this trend to kind of offshoring or nearshoring to Costa Rica continues, a lot of companies assume that they can kind of offer the same. There are actually extended working hours in Costa Rica, again, in terms of the working week, but you still have to pay significant overtime where applicable, unless it's an exempt contract. So just another thing to think about is just because you have talent in Costa Rica doesn't mean that it will behave the same or you'll have the same sort of amounts to pay depending on the amount worked. It's going to depend a lot on where they're located, again, what the norms are, what the roles are, the type of contract that you have in place with the workers, and if there's any sort of overtime rules or payments, keeping account for that, because we do see a lot of US companies in particular, they'll want the workers in Costa Rica on a certain hourly schedule that may be different than what the local norm is. So important to work with experts who really understand the local market.
Yeah, that was a wonderful ad. Thank you, Lou. So this is time for Q&A. What I'm going to do is naturally we're going to go over just a little bit with it being about a minute till the end, but I will sort of for anybody and everybody who has to jump off, thank you so much for joining. I know all the speakers are really grateful that you had joined and listened in and hopefully learned. Everybody's emails are right here. We're going to send out this contact information after the event, whether it's coming directly from Lou, Ian, or Felix, or the marketing teams associated, but you'll get this contact information. If you want to take a quick screenshot before you jump off, feel free to do so. Like I said, we'll probably only be on for just a couple more minutes. I'll address one question for each speaker as we got a few that came in. So thank you again. If you need to jump off, no problem. We will be in touch. All right, now for the first question. So the first one is for Felix. If a company starts with employer of record, is it easy to transfer the employees to a newly established entity in Mexico or other regions mentioned today? So is it easy to do that transition from employer of record to an entity in any or all, maybe more of a focus on Mexico?
A good question, Rika. Clearly, it's possible. I wouldn't always say it's easy. Obviously, with the right support and advice, that is probably easy, but it's an option. And however, it's very important that the correct procedure is followed. Otherwise, it can be non-compliant with devastating consequences. So the process typically that will follow is pretty much streamlined across the countries we've talked about today. Essentially, that will really mean terminating the agreement with the EOR provider. Technically, the EOR employs the worker or the employee. So ending the contract should be mutually agreed to avoid disputes. We always recommend. And then once that is terminated, there has to be an offer of a new employment contract under the new entity. Now, the company should really ensure the terms of that new contract are at least equal, or most times it's really actually better, but as a minimum, it should be equal to the terms that the worker had under the EOR arrangement. That really avoids any claims for the likes of severance compensation. So it's crucial that it benefits due diligence or benefits analysis is done before the exercise. We tend to do that a lot for our clients transitioning from EOR to a local entity, just to ensure that the employees are not really worse off. Because a lot of the issues are triggered by the employees when they think that they've been shortchanged as a result of that. Because in principle, the employment, nothing changed on a day-to-day basis for the employee in terms of the work they do and the responsibilities that they have. So they wouldn't want to be any negatively impacted as a result. So that is crucial. So once the contracts have been transferred all over, and in fact, before that takes place, it's also very important to ensure that the relevant registrations with the new entity have been completed. And these are mostly restrictions to do with the social securities and the tax authorities. The company must enroll with the employees with the adequate local authorities under the new entity. In fact, the last bit then will really be around the benefits continuity, because that may involve a change in the benefits provider. We see cases where we've had to move from one insurer to the other because of thresholds, because the company is moving from it's moving to a much smaller population as compared to when they were with an EOR that had a very extensive pool of employees. So again, that is something to think about. So in summary, it's very important to plan ahead, consult experts, the likes of HSP or any local employment lawyer, and just to make sure that there are no gaps in the transition process.
Okay, next question that I got was for Ian. If I am building a team in Latin America and just in the planning stage, is it useful to typically reach out to recruitment firms early or when I'm ready to start hiring? I know notice periods are more comparable to the USA versus most of Europe, so wondering the timelines.
Yeah, great question. So I would say with that, it's always better if we're able to come in earlier in the process. As you're first building that strategy, we can kind of be a trusted partner to help you as you're determining where to go. That's usually one of our first questions when we talk to a prospective client is they'll say, I'm looking to go to LATAM, or even if they say I'm looking to go to X country, the first question is why? Because depending upon their reasoning for going there, that may drive whether they absolutely have to go to that country or if there may be another country that better suits their needs. And so the earlier in the process that we're able to have the conversation, the more that those kinds of conversations can factor into where they ultimately end up hiring. Notice periods are less of a concern as to sort of the planning stage here than just, once the idea is fully formed, it's harder to reverse course. And so, for example, if we have a company that says, hey, we're looking to hire for a number of roles at significant cost savings, and so we're looking at, hiring, again, using my example of QA testers in Costa Rica, there are probably some better places that we can steer them that will offer more cost savings. And so the earlier in the process that we can come in and sort of guide them on that, the more they'll be able to kind of react and adjust accordingly.
Wonderful. Okay, perfect. And then the last question to end us off is one for Lou. So if I want to grow into multiple countries in Latin America simultaneously, is that possible with employer of record, or do I have to go one by one? And would I have the same account manager for all regions?
Absolutely. It's a fantastic question. The answer is you can expand to as many countries at once as you want. But I think as with anything, having a thoughtful decision-making process behind, number one, why this talent, and number two, why this country, and then third, really, why this EOR provider is important to making sure you get things right. Yes, we operate on a global support basis where you'd have one success manager for your entire account, no matter which countries you're going into, and that ensures a consistent experience and ensures that from a project management perspective, you have one main point of contact who can help with planning and advising on the benefits and drawbacks of different countries in comparison to each other.
Wonderful, perfect. We still have about 13 people on, so probably since Lou went first with the questions, or I'm sorry, Felix went first with the questions. Felix, please feel free to add any final thoughts you want. Ian, go after him, and then Lou finally to wrap us up.
I think, again, thanks for 10 days. I think hopefully this has been a very exciting conversation, but I want to say LATAM is a very important market. We obviously, global, we talk to clients in various other continents. I think LATAM is a very competitive market space. Obviously, the trends vary from one country to the other. And what I really say is it's important to be very aware of the local nuances, and speaking to experts, the likes of ourselves, will really give you a very good focal point and hopefully help you execute your projects in LATAM. But again, it's been quite exciting, and I look forward to continue to support our clients and moving into this market.
Well, Ian, any final thoughts?
Yeah, I would just sort of echo Felix. I think LATAM is a exciting, vibrant, fast-moving market. I think that companies that are looking to expand globally should give it serious thought. And then, if you decide that that's someplace that you'd like to explore hiring, work with a recruitment partner that knows the region and can advise you to make sure that you're taking the right steps to be successful there.
Lou, wrap us up.
The hiring landscape in Latin America has just changed drastically over the last 5 years. And so I think everyone on this call today, the points that we went through would say be really thoughtful about the approach that you take, because it's not the same market it was generally speaking as it was 5 years ago. Each country has its own nuances. Talent pools have developed rapidly, and like we said, the differences between Costa Rica and Mexico might be drastic or much different than what your expectation might be going into these new countries. And so it's really important to get lots of different pieces of advice before choosing a country and a talent pool to work with. And then getting support from the relevant service providers to do things the right way and set yourself up for success in the long term. So really exciting time, seeing a lot of activity across Latin America, and I expect that to continue over the next couple of years.
Wonderful. Well, I appreciate all three of your time and the attendees who have joined. It looks like we still have 10 that are on, so I appreciate everybody going over with us. I'm going to end it here, but yeah, I look forward to future webinars, future insight. Any questions, comments, anything additionally you want to address directly to one of the speakers, feel free to reach out to myself or them directly, but I appreciate everybody's time. Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks all.